big day for the country, big day for the Chancellor, big day for you. Front page of the Telegraph, we will face into the storm, says Hunt, as taxes surge.
It's a lot of this sort of austerity rhetoric. It's going to be rough, it's going to hurt, we're going to face into the storm. There is going to be a big rise in taxation today, Isabel, even though the tax burden, the share of tax as a percentage of our entire economy is already at a 70-year high. It's already up where it was during the immediate post-war period under Clem Attlee's Labour Party in Britain's New Jerusalem. I think a lot of people are going to be wondering, yes, we took a bit of a reputational hit after the mini-budget and Truss and Kwarteng overdid it a little bit, but should we really be steeply raising taxes into a recession when there's a cost of living crisis, when borrowing costs are going up for firms and households across the country? And I think even though Jeremy Hunt's saying we have to restore Britain's reputation for fiscal prudence, we also have to restore Britain's reputation for common sense. And this may not pass the sort of common sense sniff test with an awful lot of small business owners, with an awful lot of households hard-pressed trying to make ends meet. I don't think there are going to be big headline tax rate increases today. What there will be is what we call stealth taxes, freezing tax thresholds, keeping allowances where they are even though inflation is going up, dragging more people into higher tax brackets. It is going to hurt.
Isn't that what gives politicians a bad name?
Yeah.
People think it's just so cynical. There'll be a couple of white rabbits out the hats, won't there, Liam? But underneath, in the detail in the Red Book, thresholds being frozen. So people perhaps who are now on are going to be dragged into the 40p tax rate.
Yeah.
Far more going to be dragged into the 45p tax rate. If you're only 125,000, does that make you super rich? Apparently it's going to.
Well, if you're a sort of mid-ranking teacher or nurse, soon you're going to be paying top-rate tax.
Yeah.
Top-rate tax was never meant for, you know, with all due respect, those kind of middle-of-the-road, middle-earning people. If you're going to pass on an average price home to your kids now, you're going to be stung with inheritance tax, a threshold that stayed where it is since 2009 at 325 grand and is probably now going to be extended, that threshold, to 2028. I do agree with you, Andrew. Politicians should level with the public. If we need more taxation, say we do, and raise the headline rate of tax. And also, weeks and weeks now of this spin from the Downing Street and the Treasury, oh, it's going to be really, really tough. So when it's a bit less bad, the clever young people in Downing Street think they've, you know, pulled the wool over our eyes by making it feel not quite as bad because of all the ghastly rhetoric. No other country announces its fiscal policies like this. It's crazy.
That's interesting. It's so depressing, isn't it, for taxpayers? I mean, we already know that our public services are really creaking as a result of the pandemic, everything else that's going on. We're going to see those affected really badly by the announcements today. We're all going to pay more in tax and yet get less for it because our services are going to be in a worse state. It's no return on what we're paying.
7 million people on an NHS waiting list. Of course, you know, we would all agree that a lot of our NHS workers do a really good job. But if we, you know, a few minutes on Google looking at respectable news sources and academic sources, and you can quickly see that even though the NHS is funded pretty much as well as any health system in the world, the clinical outcomes for stroke, for heart disease, for oncology, cancer and so on are well down the international rankings. So it's not as if we've got world-class public services, but we are going to get a lot more tax. And my concern is one of timing. We know the economy is stalled. It's probably already in recession, given those GDP growth figures last week showing negative growth between July and September. We know borrowing costs are going up. We know an awful lot of small businesses were hammered during lockdown, and now they're going to face a 6p increase in corporation tax, wiping out their margin for a lot of them. I can't see how a package, as we've been presented with, can generate growth and economic expansion and economic prosperity. And without growth and economic expansion, whatever you say about the Truss-Kwarteng budget, without those things, then the fiscal situation can only get worse.
Gosh, that's depressing.
It is all a bit
depressing. Let's go to the Baroness.
Well, I wanted to pick up, actually, on that last point, because I think that the worst thing about this whole atmosphere in the statement today is that it's utterly devoid of any future-orientated hope of ensuring that the economy changes. And Liam's just made a very important point, which is that it's one thing suggesting that growth was, discredited under the very brief Kwarteng Liz Truss period. But if you've got an economy that's not growing, then basically you're talking about forever austerity and forever having, to use that, the same cake, and kind of mean-spirited atmosphere. So what I can't stand about today's announcement is that there's no, in any way, commitment to productivity increases, to any sense that at some point the economic situation might change. There's no real feeling that there's a vision for the economy. It's all cut, the slow drip of pain. This is hardly an inspiring thought, really, is it? And then they'll say, well, not everyone will suffer quite as badly as we thought.
Because they'll put the living wage up.
And the only other thing I wanted to pick up on, particularly on what Liam said, is that I think that people would be prepared to pay more taxes if it meant that they felt that they were, for example, going to get an increased form of service.
Well, that's
right.
Yeah.
Now, you sort of think, well, I think I might pay more taxes if I thought that there was going to be, for example, more social housing built. If I thought that I think there's a housing crisis. We're going to go on and talk about that. If I thought, well, I don't mind doing that, right? But, of course, you feel as though you're paying more taxes...
Getting a worse service.
Nothing is going to improve in the services. The government are going to announce that they're going to give more to the health service, and I think a lot of people just feel that's good money after bad, right? That it doesn't matter how much money's going in if you've got a health service that's basically rotten in terms of the way it's organised at the core. So in some ways, being asked to be fiscally responsible, which is not our job, by the way, as citizens. The government's saying, well, we've got to behave well. There's nothing in here that inspires people to think it's worth making these sacrifices.
Yeah. Do you think, I don't know, anecdotally, and this could just be amongst my circle of friends, but I'm hearing a lot of people sort of bracing themselves for this increase in taxes and thinking, I'm going to go abroad. I don't know if anecdotally you're hearing the same sort of thing. But
I have children of young adult age now. A lot of them are talking about going abroad. I remember growing up in London in the early 80s in a working class home. Everybody in my family, my extended family, they were working in the building trade and so on. And a lot of people left. A lot of people went to Canada, Australia, America, New Zealand, because there was just more work. And there was very, very high taxation. And it's feeling a bit like that to me now. Look, we're an amazing country. We have tremendous entrepreneurs in this country. We have brilliant technology. We have brilliant universities. There is an awful lot that we can shout and scream about. And what we need at the moment, instead of this endless, ridiculous, clever spin on the front of newspapers, which monsters business deals, which destroys business sentiment. The people doing this are mad, in my view. This endless spin about it's going to be really, really bad, just so they can feel they get a better PR hit today. When you've got this, we don't need that. We need hope and uplift, and we need to be encouraging businesses and entrepreneurs to keep going, not to throw the towel in, to keep employing people, to keep investing.
And it'll be interesting on that, won't it, whether we see, again, below the radar, government cutting grants for research and development, which is so important for the future, and low-hanging fruit, easy to chop off, and it would send a very bad signal.
We need tax breaks for business, entrepreneurship and investment, not for the big business high rollers that make endless party donations to lots of the parties, but to small, what we call SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, Andrew. We also need to get out beyond this sense that the only way to be a successful economy is to tax more. Where does that end? I completely agree with Claire. There is a market out there for a bit more tax, particularly for the better off, for much better public services. But that doesn't mean for more middle managers and more diversity officers and more, in some cases, very big gold-plated pensions for public sector workers. A fifth of people work in the public sector, and some of them do a fine job. But what about the four-fifths of us who work in the private sector, many of whom won't get a pay rise at all? And as for the minimum wage increase, it's a nice headline for the government. Who's going to pay for that? Ordinary firms.
Exactly, but also the point that you just made, Andrew, which is very important, is that we've got to see things like R&D increasing.
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So what you'd really like is, that's why I'm saying is there's nothing in this budget that says, well, actually, we're planning for the long term. So they're kicking things down the road till 2025 in many instances, but there's no sense of vision. So you'd say, we need more research and development. We need to actually think about productivity increases, bringing in new technology, exciting developments. You know, levelling up doesn't have to be nice to the north and have a nice new bridge, right, or whatever. It can be, let's have a new industrial revolution in the future. We'll at least start to do that.
But
None of that.
But it's not long-term, it's short-term, and we know what the short-term here is, the election at the end of 2024.
That's the problem. Politics,
what it's all
isn't it?
about.
That's the big theme over, you know, the ultimate cleverness. Let's put taxes up now so we can then cut them into the next election. That's playing politics with businesses and families that are trying to make ends meet.
And I'm just looking at the Telegraph today, you guys. They're looking at some waste in the public sector. So £6 billion wasted on a tank project. £6 billion wasted. Where's the accountability?
That's a penny on income tax.
Exactly. And they spent £7,000 on a luxury villa for civil servants. It's just unbelievable.
What?
It's our
Why
money.
do they need a luxury villa?
And architectural plans on HS2, 105 million, down the drain. And why does Number 10 need Fortnum and Mason deliveries for £11,000?
Well, that was Esther McVeigh.
Esther McVeigh of this parish.
Just yesterday, she said in the Commons that she won't vote through this budget. I don't think there's any chance that the government will lose its budget, but we'll see. It depends how bad these bad, in inverted commas, or ill-judged these tax cuts are. But Esther McVeigh, of course, GBNews presenter, she said that unless HS2 is scrapped, and the bill's going to be a lot more than it's going to be more like 150 billion quid to take 20 minutes off London to Birmingham. We don't even know if we're going to get the bit from Birmingham to Manchester, the bit that really counts. I know. The bit that really makes added value.
They should have gone from Birmingham to Manchester
first. Absolutely. And they should really be doing Liverpool to Hull. That's where you get the bang for your buck.
One of the things, I mean, in lots of the papers, they're doing two stories that relate to this, which is, first of all, that councils, I mean, this Yorkshire council that's basically saying second home taxes is going up. So I'd be interested to hear what Liam Halligan thinks, because this idea that we're going to do you on second homes and that's going to solve the housing crisis, I mean, again, an attack on aspiration. Not all second home owners are kind of like rich. In fact, one of the examples... No, you're not allowed. But one of the people that they gave an example was somebody who'd bought a second home for somebody to care for their father who's got Alzheimer's. You know, it's more complicated than the kind of... So it's kind of cheap rhetoric. Actually, no houses created by this at all. What about building some houses instead of kind of penalising people? But the second thing is council tax will go up because the government have decided to give councils more power. But what they're saying is, oh, you can have more power to sting your local people more than ever before because you can now put up council taxes without a referendum, an extra 5%. So what we're going to see is, this is the stealth taxes way, all sorts of ways in which, whichever way you turn as a citizen, you appear to be paying more. And that's all I'm saying is, I think the UK citizens are grown up enough to go, God, we're having a serious economic crisis here. We know that things are tough. But if you only get a diet of gloom, you've already had an item on this morning. Older people getting depressed, worried about their grandkids, actually feeling morose, an atmosphere of doom and gloom, whereas you know that you need to take cuts if you've got vision for how you're going to grow the economic change the economic situation. They've just given us the gloom, and then they said, but don't worry, we'll look after the poorest people. I want them to look after the poorest people, but they have a responsibility to ensure that there's economic prosperity. And they haven't given us any hint that that will ever happen in anyone's lifetimes.
I think it's quite important on second homes because second home owners are demonised.
Oh, I totally agree.
The majority of people who have a second home, they have just one second home. And they may have bought it for a granny or an older relative, or it's an investment for their children.
Because, or for any reason
because pensions are hopeless now, and you're getting no money in the building society, and yet they're going to be whacked.
So what increasing council tax does is it blame shifts.
That's right.
The centre can say to the local authorities, we're going to cut your block grant. If you want the money, you get it off the local people and you take the blame. And, of course, there is an argument that council tax needs to rise, but it is a form of stealth tax. And I agree with Claire totally on second homes. It's like class war, but it's not very well-targeted class war, is it? Because, as we said, not all second homes are, the places that the super-rich use twice a year, so cutting local people out of the ability to buy their own home. We simply need to build more homes. No government for the last 10 or 20 years has grasped that nettle. They've endlessly pumped up the housing market with Help to Buy. And it's much easier, isn't it, to just put lots and lots of taxes on middle class and working people than it is to tackle the vested interest. Think back to the early 80s. How did we get out of a moribund, low-growth economy? It wasn't by higher tax. It was by cutting tax and stripping away regulation and tackling the vested interest that was stopping growth from happening. It was about tackling what we used to call then, Andrew, the I'm all right, Jack economy.
Was there a problem with inflation at that point? Because isn't the argument, and we saw this through Liz Truss, didn't we, that if you come in here and cut everybody's taxes and then, try to boost growth, you actually create more of a problem with inflation, and actually people still can't afford things in the shops. I mean, I'm no economist. But...
No, I think we've got to get over this massive demonisation of what Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng were trying to do. Yes, they over-egged it. Yes, the timing of certain measures like cutting the top rate of tax in the middle of a cost of living crisis were badly done. Yes, there was a bit of zealousness and they were very much in a hurry. But their central message, we need to grow the economy to fix the public finances.
Conservative.
That was absolutely,
that
was economics 101.
Right, that is like
economics 101.
You don't have to be on the right to believe that. You can basically be somebody who says, I want more economic prosperity.
But I think even Rishi Sunak would say that, wouldn't he? I want to do all of those things.
Yeah, but
it's
he's
just
not
it's not economic.
If I could just just on the housing question, I just wanted to say there's a good quote from one of the articles which said Whitby wages can't even afford affordable houses in Whitby. And I understand that, and I think that what this talks to is this idea that, you buy a house, you stick it on the Airbnb market. What about the Whitby person who can't buy their house? Again, I just think all of these things are so superficial, though, because actually somebody with a second home who puts it on Airbnb can actually bring business into the local area. Right. The crisis is that there's no houses being built in Whitby, or potentially the crisis is that you're not getting paid enough money in Whitby, right? All of these things are not the blame of Airbnb owners. And so all the time I think that you're having the finger pointed at the wrong culprits and therefore not solving the real problems.
Right.
Here's a question I wonder. Will Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss be in the chamber?
I know.
Where will they be? Let's send out a GB News search party, a prize, whoever spots the former Prime... Because we saw her at the Cenotaph on Sunday.
Yeah.
For the first time. And she looked terrible.